So apparently not content to rest on his laurels for destroying the big lie about conservatives and Republicans being racist, Dinesh D'Souza has a new book out called The Big Lie, where we destroy the idea of us being fascists as well. It's called The Big Lie: Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left, and it's a great honor and pleasure to have our friend Dinesh D'Souza with us today. Dinesh, how are you, pal?
Very good, and it's very good to be on the show. Boy, I could not have predicted this whole Charlottesville business, but the book seems written almost as a direct analysis of that situation, which is a classic example of trying to play the fascist card and the racist card both.
Before we get into the contents of the book, after the events in Georgia, and prior to, obviously, but there's been a storm lately of attempts to basically pull down Confederate statues as well, I guess. They're trying to pull down Confederate monuments. There's a gigantic, enormous wave going through the country. No more statues of Robert E. Lee or Stonewall Jackson or anything. Do you think that's an attempt to rewrite history?
Well, it's an attempt to support a rewriting of history that has already to some degree happened. So the rewriting of history goes like this. The Civil War was a war between the good people of the North and the evil people of the South. And guys like Robert E. Lee are the villains of that narrative. Now let's think about this for a minute. Lee was a man of such military ability as well as personal integrity that he was offered by Abraham Lincoln command of the Union Army of the North. The only reason Lee was opposed to slavery and secession, but he only fought for the South in defense of his native Virginia. So this is not exactly, it's really odd that a guy who opposed slavery and secession becomes the poster boy for slavery and secession. Now, there are all kinds of bad guys in the Democratic Party, the latest of which I would say is Robert Byrd, former leader of the Ku Klux Klan. Half of West Virginia is named after Robert Byrd. You drive up and down the highways, Robert Byrd School, Robert Byrd Highway,
Absolutely.
Robert Byrd Medical Center. And yet, I don't see these Antifa guys going through West Virginia pulling down all the Robert Byrd monuments. Why? Because Byrd was a lionized Democrat until his death. Hillary Clinton called him her mentor. Obama and Bill Clinton were eulogizing him at his funeral. So this is a very selective outrage designed to shift the blame for slavery away from the Democratic Party onto the South.
Well, I'm glad I'm sitting down, Dinesh, because you can only imagine my shock at this kind of selective erasure of history and covering up of history. So moving off of the racism issue, let's get to this other slander that's often, in fact, almost continuously leveled against conservatives. They call us racist. You showed in your last book and movie that's just absolute inversion of the truth. It's a big lie. They call us fascists and Nazis too. I'd like to start with fascists because everybody knows the story of the Nazis, but the Nazis were preceded by an entire political movement, weren't they?
Yeah, the Nazis were actually not, they didn't call themselves fascists. Hitler very rarely used the term fascism. If you read Mein Kampf, Hitler's autobiography, the word fascism almost never appears in the entire book. Mussolini was the quintessential fascist, and he came to power in the 1920s, a full decade before Hitler. Now, fascism for Mussolini had a very clear meaning. Fascism was the ideology of the centralized state. Mussolini goes everything in the state and nothing outside the state. And what Mussolini meant is that the state needs to control the private sector, state-directed capitalism, and moreover, the state needs to run your private life. And this clearly sounds a little bit more like the platform of the Democratic Party than it does the platform of the Republican Party.
It absolutely does, doesn't it? Funny how that works. I'd like to talk about another thing about the word fascism and so on that I think further bolsters this case. And to do that, we have to take a look at the image, sort of the logo that Mussolini chose for fascist Italy during the years that he was dictator. There you can see it right now. It's an odd-looking thing. Most people look at it and have no idea what it is, but it's actually really interesting. In Italian, it's called a fascio. In Latin, it's called fasces, and it means a bundle of sticks. You can see it's a bunch of sticks tied together by ropes and strings there. So why on earth would Mussolini choose the word fascist? Where did it come from? It came from a bundle of sticks. His entire argument was the collectivist argument. He was saying individual people are like individual sticks. You can break them very easily, but if you bundle them all together and lump them together and have the state bind them together, then they're unbreakable. So that the entire word fascism, Dinesh, is essentially a synonym for collectivism.
And the history of Mussolini proves that. Mussolini was a Marxist. He was with Gramsci, the most famous Marxist in Italy. When Mussolini did his march on Rome in 1922 to establish the world's first fascist regime, Lenin sent a telegram of congratulations. Why? Because Lenin recognized that Mussolini was a fellow revolutionary of the left. So I think it's really remarkable now to see the way in which these terms are being manipulated. We're getting the idea that because of these ragtag Ku Klux Klansmen and so-called neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, that fascism must be a right-wing phenomenon. Because why else would they be chanting "Hail Trump" and so on? The whole thing is very suspect. I just read on the Southern Poverty Law Center website today that this guy Kessler, the white supremacist who organized the rally, is an Obama guy, and he was part of the Occupy Wall Street group. So this tells me that something very fishy is going on. We might be watching a staged tableau.
Can you set up for the audience kind of the really erroneous and extremely deceptive language that we all use today, and that is the idea that America consists of the left and the right. The left are the liberals, the right are conservatives. And these terms, left and right, actually came from the left and right side of an aisle in a parliament. I forget which one, might have been the German parliament. But basically, these are European terms to separate the communists from the fascists, right? These were not polar opposites.
Yeah, no, I think we've got to be careful here because the terms in America and in Europe mean different things. When you say conservative in Europe, people often think you're defending the ancien regime, you're defending throne and altar, you're defending an alliance between the monarchy and the established church. Now, in America, none of this is even relevant. In America, if you draw a straight line, on the one side is the power of the state, collectivism. On that side, the left side, we would have to put socialism, communism, fascism, and progressivism, all on the same side of the aisle. On the other side of the aisle, the right side is limited government and individual rights. And if we think of the term right-wing extremist, Bernie Sanders was raving about right-wing extremists. A right-wing extremist is somebody who wants so much individual rights and the government to be so small that there's virtually no government at all, a kind of libertarian anarchist.
You know, we were talking just a moment ago about the Republican Party and how it was formed as an anti-slavery party. The Republican Party was born as not only a liberal party, a progressive party. It was just positively unheard of. It was a radical party. And so over time, the kind of the adjective Republican and Democrat has morphed a little bit, and conservative and liberal has morphed and sometimes inverted. It's the liberals now that are in favor of things like laws against hate speech, the liberals who want to control everything and limit all the freedoms. And I tell people I'm trying to conserve classical liberalism. But I have found, Dinesh, that the one set of adjectives that really does work over time is collectivists and individualists.
Right. The fascism and communism are forms of collectivism. They differ only in that communism is international and fascism is national. That's why Hitler used the term National Socialism, to marry nationalism, if you will, to socialism. So this is the idea that Trump is a fascist. Does Trump want the government to be bigger or smaller? Clearly smaller. Does he want private corporations to be weaker or to have more autonomy? He wants them to have more autonomy. Does he want the individual to be weaker or stronger vis-a-vis the centralized state? Stronger. So this is anti-fascism. It's the very opposite of fascism, and that's why it's a big lie to try to foist these labels onto Trump and onto the right.
It absolutely is. And now let's move from the word fascist and what it actually means and who invented it and what their background is. And let's move to the word Nazi. Now, I've got a picture here of a Nazi pin. It's a Nazi party pin that if you were, needless to say, if you remember the Nazi party, you wore this pin with pride. And you can see it there. And on the Nazi pin, it says National Socialist and then DAP. Nazi is an acronym for NASDAP, basically, NSDAP, National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, which basically means the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Dinesh, you can't spell Nazi without Socialist Workers' Party, can you?
So this was this then shows you the full kind of chutzpah and magnitude of the big lie, because for the left, in order for this to work, for them to be able to pin fascism on the Republican elephant, they have to take the socialism out of National Socialism. They have to hide the actual meaning of Nazism. They also have to hide history, because Hitler got a number of his most destructive genocidal schemes from the example of the American Democratic Party. Hitler, for example, got the idea of doing these European conquests. He had initially thought that he would have to rival the British and the French in going to Asia and Africa in search of colonies to occupy. Then he remembered that the Democrat Andrew Jackson threw the Native American Indians off their land, dispossessed them, exterminated a bunch of them, drove them west, and then took over their land and enslaved some of the ones who remained. And Hitler goes, wow, I'm going to do that. I'll throw the Poles, the Slavs, the Eastern Europeans, the Russians, I'll push them further away. I'll resettle the land with German families. If any of the natives stay back, we'll enslave them. I'm saying Hitler literally lifted the blueprint for European Lebensraum, Lebensraum meaning living space, German expansionism in Europe. He got that from the American Democratic Party of the 19th century.
If you want to make a progressive's head explode, especially a progressive's professor's head explode, just go into one of these classrooms in political science and say that the Nazis were socialists. Their head's going to come off. But what I find interesting about that is this, and this is always my response: the Nazis weren't socialists. My response to that is, hey, listen, I didn't name them, right? It wasn't Bill Whittle or Dinesh D'Souza that named them the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Now, it's true that Hitler wanted power at any cost, and if he could get it through socialism, he'd get it. If he could get it through nationalism, he'd get it. Guys like Goebbels and the Strassers were more committed to the socialist aspect of it. But at the very least, Dinesh, doesn't the entire Nazi experiment show, at the very least, that if this is not socialism, then dictators will use the word socialism to shoehorn themselves into positions of absolute power?
I think that's actually true, but it makes no more sense to say of Hitler that we shouldn't believe his ideology because he was an opportunist. Then it makes sense to say that because Lenin and Stalin were opportunists, they weren't by the same token also communists. Communism was the mechanism for them to achieve their opportunism. It was the ideology that, in a sense, rationalized their will to power. And so there's a kind of similarity between the Nazis and the communists. And then it's interesting that the American progressives of the time were fascinated by both.
Yeah, fascinated is understating the case. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to author Dinesh D'Souza about the big lie about calling conservatives and Republicans fascists, and we're going to talk a little bit about how they pulled it off and what we can do to put an end to it. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Hot Mic Show. Bill Whittle here with Dinesh D'Souza, author, filmmaker, and certainly tremendous champion of freedom. He's talking about his latest book called The Big Lie, exposing the Nazi roots of the American left. We've been talking since the beginning of the show about what has happened historically, why it was in fact the Nazis and the fascists were socialists. They were left-wingers. Dinesh, you named your book The Big Lie, and that's a term that Hitler used. Can you tell us how he used it, what he meant by the big lie?
Now, Hitler meant by the big lie a phrase he coined, that a small lie is easy to catch, because a small lie refers to something that we are typically in a position to check out. Whereas a big lie, Hitler says, it's difficult to get your head around it. It's so big, it encompasses so much, that it's easier to sucker people with a big lie than a small lie. Now, a lot of people think that when Hitler said this, he was referring to himself. He was saying, in effect, that I, Hitler, am going to use these big lies. Hitler was actually blaming the big lie on the Jews. He was claiming that the Jews are the ones who sell these big lies and get away with it. Now, but I think that this notion of a big lie is very applicable to the left today, because the left in the 1940s was very well aware of its deep ties to Mussolini's fascism and even to early Nazism. But after the war, the left knew the progressives coming into power in academia and media and Hollywood, they knew that if this stuff gets out in the era after the Holocaust, after Auschwitz and Dachau and all those images of the concentration camps, the left in America would be finished. The Democratic Party would barely be able to recover. And so they began a very interesting intellectual project, and that is to cover up the ties between the left and fascism and Nazism, and to try to move fascism from the left-wing column to the right-wing column. And this would involve some redefinition of fascism. Stop talking about centralized government, which is the essence of fascism. Start talking about features of fascism that were purely incidental, like nationalism. And so that later, 50 years later, 75 years later, they can say, Trump wants to make America great again. Didn't Hitler want to make Germany great again? Ergo, Trump is a fascist. This is all the, I would call it fake Nazism or fake fascism that the left has invented post-World War II.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. So when you say Hitler was talking about the big lie, he was basically saying, in the present day context, it's easier to convince the country that Republicans are fascist rather than to say Jim O'Malley, my neighbor, is a fascist, because you know Jim O'Malley, he's inside your sphere of influence. You can check, you can confirm. He's not a fascist. He's a great guy. But when you make a lie that big, as you say, it's very tough to pin down. One of the things that Hitler used in order to get the big lie sold was relentless media pressure, relentless. And here the dark genius of Joseph Goebbels has to be mentioned, because what the Nazis did was they used all of the different mediums available to them, including Zeppelins, air shows, everything, and kept pumping the same message, the same message, the same message. And so that lie has to be pushed, doesn't it? It has to be pushed, and you can't have somebody standing there telling the truth when every loudspeaker in the country is blaring out this big lie.
Well, Goebbels had a very profound, in a sense, idea, and his idea was that you want to get people to internalize the principles of Nazism. He called it working toward the Führer. You got to want people to work toward the Führer and show symbols of conformity. And so, for example, if we think of something like the Heil Hitler salute or the flying of the swastika flag, that was a way, when you put that flag on your front, the front of your door, you were signaling to people, I am an obedient person who is willing to go along with Nazism. I'm not going to step out of line. They have nothing to fear from me. And in America, we have the same kind of political correctness that's being enforced by the left. They want all of us to signal that we are in conformity with the ideological orthodoxies that they have determined. And if we're not, they're going to drive us out of Hollywood. They're going to drive us out of academia. They're going to torment us through media. This is the fascism of today that's more scary than what's going on the street. I'm much more scared of the studio boss who will throw you out of Hollywood and make sure you never work again than I am of the Antifa protester on the streets of Berkeley.
So what you're basically saying is, some leftists might say, progressivists say, well, that's ridiculous. We don't have a leftist salute. We don't have a progressive salute here in this country. But I would argue having a coexist bumper sticker on your car is essentially the leftist salute, the progressive salute, and driving a Prius and talking about socialism and being a Bernie fan. You're exactly right. All of these things come together to create a sense that you're on the inside, you're part of the collective, no need to worry about me, everything's going to be fine, and displace all of your guilt and anger onto some third party. We're about out of time. Dinesh, is there a plan for a movie for this?
I think so. I realize the left has these massive megaphones, and at the end of the day, we've got to build some megaphones of our own. Books are very powerful, and they make an intellectual argument, but movies convert that argument into emotionally powerful material. A 90-minute film is something that you can leave, and you've been changed on the inside when you left. And so I like the idea of doing the books and then ultimately setting them to music and to pictures and putting them in the theater.
I like it too. I saw 2016 Obama's America, and I've been a filmmaker for pretty much all my life. And immediately when I saw the quality of the graphics work, just the quality of the graphics and kind of the bleed backgrounds and stuff, I said this is a man who knows what he's doing. And Dinesh, we both know that you're a soldier, and we both know that you're an effective soldier because, as I mentioned to you a couple days ago, you're the only political prisoner I ever shook hands with.
Well, I guess it's a badge of honor in a strange way. I didn't seek out to become one, but it has fired me up, and it's actually shown me. I mean, think about it. How dangerous are people when they're able to deploy the institutions of the government, the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, the SWAT teams of the federal government against their political opposition? That's something that started with Obama, it's continued with Hillary. It's a very dangerous turn in American politics, and I'm determined to fight against it.
Good for you, buddy. I am too, and it is a dangerous time in American politics. Dinesh D'Souza's new book is called The Big Lie, exposing the Nazi roots of the American left. Dinesh, thanks so much for taking time to be with us today. We really appreciate it.
Bill, always a pleasure.
Thank you.